everyone, and welcome back to another True Crime Tuesday. So, today's case is going to be about Suzy Lamplugh. So, Suzy was 25 years old when she went missing in Fulham, London. On July 28th of 1986 at 12:30 p.m., she left the office where she worked as an estate agent to meet up with a client to show him a property. This client was listed in the appointments book as Mr. Kipper. So, about 2 hours later, her manager noticed that she was still gone, and this wasn't like her. She wasn't the kind of person to, take the piss out of going on an appointment and then staying away a few hours longer to do personal errands. Like, she was a very hard worker, and she would normally always come straight back to the office. And so he called her mother. Keep in mind, this was the 80s, so there were no cell phones. So he called her mother, and she also hadn't heard from her. Now, she was seen at the property at 12:50. And around 1 p.m., she was joined by a man who we can assume was the client. Now, some sources say they argued, but I don't know if that's true because other sources say that they were just talking. And they got in a car together and drove away. And that was the last time that anyone ever saw Suzy. Now, her car was found around 10 p.m. that evening, around 1.5 miles away from the property. The ignition key was missing, but her purse was found in the car door, like in the little compartment in the car door. There were no signs of struggle found in the car, and all the fingerprints were accounted for. So basically, everyone whose fingerprint was found in the car had a reason to be in the car. The driver door was unlocked and the handbrake was off. I don't really know what that means. A lot of people seem to think that the handbrake being off is suspicious, but I never put my handbrake on. I always leave my car in first gear. Like in Europe, nobody drives an automatic. I mean, it's very rare. We all drive manual transmission, and my driving instructor told me that if you put your handbrake on and it freezes outside, that your handbrake could freeze and you wouldn't be able to get it off. So he told me to just leave my car in first gear, and I always do that. Even when I park on a hill, I leave it in first gear without a handbrake, and it doesn't move at all. So I don't know if that's something that she would have known about in the 80s, but I don't necessarily think it's that suspicious that her handbrake was off, although I also don't know if the car was in neutral without a handbrake or if it was in first gear. Don't know. Now, police suggested that a black left-hand drive BMW vehicle might have been involved because of an eyewitness account of a car of that description seen at the same location as Suzy's car. Interesting to note that it was a left-hand drive, and in England you would have a right-hand drive, so that's a bit weird. Now, as of 1994, which is 8 years later, Suzy was presumed murdered, and people are now looking for a body rather than a missing woman. Up until this point, they always just assumed she was missing. Now, there were 23,000 leads in total given to police, and for the first 8 years, like I said, she was just considered a missing person because police had no reason to believe otherwise. She was an adult, so she could have walked away herself, and they weren't really looking at suspects because they were treating her as just a missing person. Now, in July of 1986, the same month that she disappeared, there was a man named John Cannan living in a day release hostel in a prison in London. He was coming to the end of an 8-year-long prison sentence for rape, and he was put in day release to get used to some freedom. A day release is basically a part of prison where I don't know if it's like in a separate building or if it's part of an actual existing prison, but you basically have to come back there at night. You have to sleep there. You have to report in every night, but you are free to do what you want during the day. You're free to get a job if you can and earn some money. Like, you're basically getting ready to go back into the real world. Now, because there were 23,000 leads, it took police almost a full year to realize that John looked a lot like the description people gave of the client that Suzy was seen with at the property. His work colleagues and fellow inmates said that he was a very charming person. He could get a date with a woman in 30 minutes. So, because he was allowed to go wherever he wanted during the day, he just went about his day. And apparently he had a lot of access to BMWs. Now, I'm not entirely sure why this was. I know that before he went to jail, he was a mechanic. So maybe, or no, he was a car salesman, I believe. It comes up later in my notes. But I think he was a car salesman. So maybe through his old contacts, he had access to BMWs, and there was a BMW found by police or, reported, but it was a left-hand drive, so I'm not entirely sure if this is, related. Here it is, yeah. Obviously, if he did have access to a lot of BMWs, then that would make him look more successful, and it wouldn't make people who meet him automatically assume that he was a prisoner. He was also looking for a place to live in Fulham. Now, before he went to prison, he worked as a car salesman. He got married in his 20s, and everything seemed, to be going okay. He seemed to have a happy life. And about 6 years after his marriage, he left his wife for a younger woman shortly after the birth of his first child. Now, she ended up not being happy anymore, and she tried to leave him, and that's when he became violent. And all of his relationships ended up violent after that. I think it was her rejection that made him violent. And every woman after that rejected him just turned him violent. A few years later, then, he raped a woman for which he was sentenced to jail for 8 years. Now, Suzy's family believes that she was being stalked before she went missing. She told her parents about a man that she found quite scary, but she said that she could cope with it. Police actually believe that John and Suzy were together, whether officially as a couple or just kind of dating, but they believe that they were an item somehow. And that this was a planned attack from John on Suzy. So I don't know whether the man she thought was stalking her was actually John and that she had broken up with him and he wouldn't leave her alone, or whether she didn't know who it was, or whether it was a completely different person to John. Now, people believe that they might have had a fight. She might have broken up with him, or they might have been arguing, and he wanted to see her, but she wouldn't, so he pretended to be a client so that she would meet him somewhere at this property. And that then somehow he turned violent when she rejected him. He was officially released on July 25th, and 3 days later is when Suzy went missing. Now, a short while later, he joined a dating agency to meet more women. Now, back in the 80s, this wasn't online, so he had to make a tape of himself. Now, I saw a piece of the tape, and he was indeed a very charming person. He was well-dressed, he was well-spoken, he was well-groomed. He came across as, the interviewer, the woman who was interviewing him for the tape, said that she found him very charming, that she really liked him. He was, being funny, he was making jokes, he was kind of a little bit flirty when he was talking to the camera, he was very charming. A few days after this tape was made, another woman went missing. Now, they searched for her for weeks, and her body ended up being found in some woods in Somerset. John Cannan was linked to her death, and they found that after he took her, he had kept her in his apartment for 18 hours before he took her to the woods. He was also arrested for raping 2 women in a clothes shop, which is actually what allowed them to link him to that woman's disappearance after the rape. searched his apartment and they found like items that belonged to this missing woman. Now, he had also told a previous girlfriend that he dated after Suzy went missing that he knew where Suzy was buried, and he even, like, she said that they were in a car driving and that he suddenly started talking about Suzy Lamplug's disappearance, like out of the blue. She didn't, like, I'm guessing she knew her from the news, but she didn't know who she was, and that they drove past an area and he said, "Oh, I know she's buried here." He also told her that his nickname used to be Kipper because of the Kipper ties he used to wear, and his fellow inmates have also said that his nickname was Kipper in prison. And since the client used the name Mr. Kipper, I think it's safe to assume that it was the same person. Now, in late October of 2018, police began searching the former house of Cannan's mother. They had also searched this property back in 2002. They dismantled the garage and began removing its concrete floor, whilst also carrying out a search of the back garden. However, on the 12th of November 2018, police announced that the search of the property had ended and no evidence had been found. On April 28th, 1989, John Cannan was jailed for life for the murder of the other woman, who was named Shirley Banks, and the attack on the two other women. So, he is obviously, he's obviously a suspect in this case of Suzy, but he's never been charged with her disappearance, and her body has also never been recovered. I find it a little bit, I can't find this anywhere, but I question whether police searched the area that he told this girlfriend that Suzy was buried. Like, if you're looking for a missing person and you believe that this guy might have something to do with it, I would imagine that you might take it seriously and go, okay, if he says she's buried there, let's search this area. We're either going to find her body and we can charge him, or we're not going to find anything, and then we know that we've done at least everything we could. But I couldn't find anywhere that they actually searched that area. Now, Suzy was officially declared dead in 1994. Now, in 1994, I said earlier that Suzy was officially presumed murdered, but she was actually declared dead in 1994. They did arrest John Cannan in 2000 for her murder and questioned him, but he wasn't charged. Now, in 2002, detectives said publicly that they do believe that he killed Lamplugh, and confirmed this in 2006 when arguing against any reduction in his sentence for the other murder. But again, they were not able to charge him with anything. So that was it for this video. I'm sorry that it's so short. I really didn't realize that when I was researching it. I thought that this was a pretty long case, but it doesn't always turn out that way. Sometimes cases that I think are really short last like half an hour and vice versa. I thought this was going to be a pretty long case, but it wasn't. So I'm really sorry about that. Let me know down below in the comments what you think. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that he did something to her. I find it interesting that police think they were dating. I don't know why. I mean, obviously, like I said, he was very charming, and you wouldn't, be able to tell that he was in jail, so I can kind of understand it, but I find it a really sad coincidence that she meets this guy, starts dating him, and then he turns out to be a convicted rapist who was still in jail at the time. I don't even understand this whole day release facility. I don't know if that still exists in this day and age, because I've never actually heard of that before. I've heard of day passes, where you can get a pass to go out for the day, but not where you live in a facility where you're released every single day before your final release. I can't imagine that they still do that now, but if you know that they do, then please comment that below. So that's it for this case. I hope you like this video nonetheless, and yeah, as always, always, please